much like our own society today, and the warning to the people that God wanted to be given. Church, we have a lesson to be learned in Psalm 50. And I think that we need to see that God might be speaking to us through what's going on with this horrible, horrible virus that's going on in this world today. God might be hitting us with one of the woes. It might be one of the plagues. You never know. I don't know. You know, there's plagues of locusts that are hitting Africa right now that could end up here. We don't know. You know, there's earthquakes that are going on. There's wars and rumors of wars all over the world right now. We need to be very vigilant. You know, Jesus is returning soon. We're about to come to the point when we're coming to the Passover. This next week is Palm Sunday. It's leading into the Passover week. Church, we need to be vigilant. We need to be constantly praying over this church and the future of God's kingdom. God is mighty. He is in control. And he wants his church to put him in charge. He is the head of his church. You know, we're just the leaders that are put here to lead here on earth. But he's the head. He's the one that's truly in charge and in control. Today, our first misunderstanding that we're going to see is that God is not that big, fluffy, lovey-dovey God that we all want to think that he is. Psalm 50, verse 1 through 6 says, "The mighty one, God the Lord, has spoken and summoned the earth from the rising of the sun to the setting. Out of Zion, the perfection of beauty, God has shown forth. May our God come and not keep silence. Fire devours before him, and it's very tempestuous around him, and summons the heavens above and the earth to judge his people. Gather my godly ones to me, those who have made my covenant with me by sacrifice. And the heavens declare his righteousness, for God himself is judge." God is not the fluffy, fuzzy-wuzzy snuggle buddy that the people think that he is, folks. You know, we've far too long thought that God is, or that Jesus himself is this big, big old teddy bear pushover that just wants to give in to all of our whims and let us get away with whatever it is that we want to get away with. And people think that it's okay to go about and live our lives in sin the way that we want to live our lives, and Jesus is just going to forgive us and it'll all be okay. You know, we can go out here and live lives of sexual debauchery. You know, we have guys who are people that call themselves Christians who live in homosexuality lifestyles. We have people who live lifestyles that are in fornication. You know, we have people who live in lifestyles that are adulterous. They think it's okay to go out here and have relationships with people outside of their marriages. You know, fornication is just as sinful as homosexuality. All of it is sexual sin. It is all dreaded, and it's all called abomination in the eyes of God. It is all sin that will keep you out of heaven, folks. God has called us to be pure and holy. And it's difficult sometimes to not lust. It's really hard. But God has called his church to be holy as he is holy. We think that it's all good and fluffy, that God is just, so pleased with us, that He'll just forgive anything that we do. All last week, we heard all this grand, these, people on Facebook and on the news and everything, talking all this great stuff about our governor over here in Kentucky, who is a deacon in his church. And yet he stands with Planned Parenthood and thinks it's okay to promote abortion and, create abortion clinics all over the state of Kentucky. Folks, I'm going to tell you something. I would not stand with that man. I wouldn't even call him a Christian. You cannot stand for the murder of innocent children and call yourself a Christian. In fact, if he were a deacon in my church, I'd ask him to step down, and I'd actually ask him to step away if he was publicly, walking with people from Planned Parenthood. I would ask him to step out of fellowship from the church. I would disfellowship him. And yeah, that's Matthew 18 style, if you want to get biblically accurate. We cannot stand for sin in our lives. And yeah, folks, we are not perfect. And I know that the church has people who are probably living sinful lifestyles, and we are not perfect, and your preacher is not a perfect man. I know that I live sin in my life. I know I'm a sinner. I'm no any better than anybody else. I'm just one who has been forgiven. And I try really hard to live a better life today than I did yesterday. And I'm going to try harder tomorrow to be a better Christian tomorrow than I was today. But God wants me to lift that up out of my life. God has called us out in Psalm 50. As the judge over mankind, we need to stop acting like God is okay with us living in sin. It's time for us to step out and maybe even repent in our own lives. As God has forgiven our misgivings over his nature, we need to be asking him for forgiveness. We might need to be repenting ourselves, church. Each and every one of us. Because I'll be honest with you, there's times when I've known in my heart that Jesus would forgive. And I thought, you know what? I hope and pray that Jesus would forgive me for some of the things that I do. It's hard for me to stop doing in my life. I'm not perfect. But I try every day to be better than I was yesterday. God is love, and love is tough love sometimes. And sometimes we don't always get what we want. And we have to be willing to accept that. God is the judge over us. He is not some fuzzy-wuzzy teddy bear that's just going to forgive and forget. It doesn't work that way. We have to know that God is a jealous God, God is an angry God, and yes, God is a loving God. He's all of that. Our second misunderstanding is that man has no control over what goes on in this world. Look at verse 7 through 15 real quick. He says, "Hear, O my people, and I will speak. O Israel, I will testify against you. I am God, your God. I do not reprove you, for your sacrifices and your burnt offerings are continually before me. I shall take no bull out of your house, nor male goats out of your folds. For every beast of the forest is mine, the cattle on 1,000 hills. I know every bird of the mountain, and everything that moves in the field is mine. If I were hungry, I would not tell you, for the world is mine, and all it contains. Shall I eat the flesh of bulls and drink the blood of male goats? Offer to God a sacrifice of thanksgiving, and pray your vows to the Most High. Call upon me in the day of trouble, and I shall rescue you, and you will honor me." Here's the thing. always have this thing. It blows my mind when people try to say that we are destroying the world with dino fuels. Oh my goodness, our carbon emissions are destroying the world. And we're all going to die in 12 years. It's always 12 years or 10 years. And yet, the polar ice caps didn't melt. And in fact, the last 10 years, they've actually gotten thicker and thicker. Al Gore has been proven wrong, and yet he just keeps opening his trap. And all he does is just keep lying and lying. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Why? Because it's God's. It all belongs to God. Yes, God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. Folks, one of the dumbest things that I've ever thought in my mind is this idea that we can do anything to destroy what it is that God has created. It is God's. It is not ours. All we can do is be good stewards of it. Now, I'll be honest with you, they would get more respect out of me if they said, hey, we need to be good stewards of our environment, than to try to turn everybody against the world and say, oh, well, we're polluting the world and we're doing this and that, and we're destroying the world and we're all going to die. Let me tell you something, folks. Let's show the ignorance of these so-called scientists that don't even understand how water works. Let's take a cup of ice and fill it all the way to the top and add a little water in it and get it right to the edge of the rim. And let's let it sit there all day long and let it melt. I'll bet you $5 right now that it doesn't overflow the cup when it melts. Why? Because ice is condensed water. It actually is expanded water. So when it melts, it gets smaller. Hello, when the ice caps melt, we're going to get more beaches. We're not going to flood the beaches. We're going to get more beaches. Hello, scientists. Try actually doing a science experiment that a 2-year-old could do. We could do that in 2nd grade science fair and prove these people wrong. God has created the earth. He's the one that flooded the earth. And yes, we have condensed fossil fuels. And it's not dinosaurs, folks. There's not enough dinosaurs in the world to create all the gas that we use every day. And you know what happens to dinosaurs when they sit and rot and decay? Things come along and eat the flesh off of them. We don't have enough bones to be able to make all the oil that we have. It's actually rotten leaves and rotten carcasses from trees, not dinosaurs. When we have the dinosaur things on the gas stations, they're not really Dino from Fred Flintstone. That's not the way it worked. Okay? When the flood came, everything fell, and we had the sediment that fell on top of all the stuff that's in the bottom, and it's all laying on top, and the pressure and the heat from the sun has all condensed on top of all that sludge that's sitting underneath, and it condenses and turns into oil. And then we come along and pump it out. Amazing. Now that happens to be made out of carbon. Now we pump carbon into the air, and carbon dioxide is actually what, our plants breathe. Right? So what do plants create? It creates oxygen that we breathe. We breathe carbon dioxide. So it's God has created this so it works back and forth. We make the plants better, the plants make us better. So the more people that we have and the more stuff and creatures that we have, the more it actually makes the stuff go back. 1,000 years ago, Indianapolis, guess what it was? It was ice. And there was not a single car. There were no people there. Guess what? There was no global warming. People back there screaming that all that stuff is melting from cars. And yet all that ice melted. Isn't that amazing? You know why? We needed the room for humans to live. God said, fill the earth. So he had to make room for us to be able to fill it. So as we need the more space, God makes more room for us. The carbon dioxide that we breathe goes into the plants. The plants get stronger and more of them come out. You know, the ice caps have actually gotten thicker and thicker over the last 10 years. Scientists keep lying, saying they're going to melt, that they're all melting. And the polar bears are all going to die. Polar bears are plenty safe. We cannot destroy what it is that God created. Unless you want to go into 1 Peter and read what he states about how we're all going to burn when the